George Soros. What role is he playing in this right now? And maybe not so much him, but his son, Alex Soros, who's married to Huma Abedin. The other thing, Mike, that's so surprising to me is that you hear the regurgitation of like 15 of the same names constantly. Jake Sullivan, Susan Rice, or, it's like the same regurgitation of names. Like there's not a few billion people living in the world. What role is Soros playing in I mean, he's always destabilized countries, but right now, specifically, as it pertains to President Trump and Tesla?
Well, George Soros is the top donor drafter on the Democrat side. And I always describe the structure of the blob as being the inside of it is the State Department, the Pentagon, the intelligence community, and then right in between is USAID. That's the government, the sort of guts, the center of the blob. Underneath that, you have the NGOs,
right, and
you have the civil society partners who are the spandrels of the State Department, the Pentagon, the CIA, and USAID. That sort of like tree roots tentacle out into the world, tens of thousands of them, hundreds of thousands of them. On top of the government side of the blob is the donor drafter class, and by donor drafter I mean these are very high net worth individuals or multinational corporations or hedge funds,
right,
that donate into the political campaigns of and therefore get access to personnel to determine who is actually running CIA, who is actually running state, who is actually running Pentagon, who's actually running USAID, because that's basically the deal that you make with donors is they pay you a lot of money, they get a say over how you staff your the agencies, and personnel is policy. So it's not really about what you run on. It's about who is actually at the agency doing what they do. And I call them donor drafters because you can think of it like a bike race. In a bike race, the best strategy is not to be out front the whole race where you are bearing the full force of the wind. The best strategy in a bike race is to be right behind the guy and who's cutting the wind for you. And so what you have in this donor drafter class are people who co-invest with USAID, co-invest with the State Department in all of their operations. They also pay for the political campaigns, and then their own personal interests draft off of the battering ram of what state and CIA and USAID and Pentagon do. So, for example, ExxonMobil will make political contributions to a particular candidate. Right. They will get a say over, for example, Rex Tillerson was the Secretary of State for Donald Trump. The State Department will then go in and fund NGOs. It will do diplomacy with foreign countries. It will open up the oil and gas lines, and ExxonMobil will make banks. So they've both donated into the government pool of money, and they are drafting off of what the State Department does. So there's essentially a battering ram that knocks open the door for this financial and corporate class to operate. And you see the same thing with Soros. He didn't just luck his way into $38 billion at the Open Society Foundation. His personal investments profit massively off of the operations that he donates into and drafts off of. Can I give a few examples of this to flesh this out? So, for example, George Soros bought a large stake in Halliburton and then campaigned on expanding NATO, and Halliburton holds the contracts with Naftagaz to process the oil and gas and shale in Ukraine. George Soros, there was a famous case in the 1990s where George Soros was supporting the Clinton administration as they were privatizing the Russian state-held assets after the end of the Cold War. And the other partner of George Soros at that time was a group called the Harvard Institute for International Development.
Go figure.
If that name sounds familiar, it's a parallel with the U.S. Agency for International Development. And in fact, the Harvard Institute for International Development got $500 million from the U.S. Agency for International Development to travel to Russia and to help them sell off all of these previously state-held assets by the Soviet Union in fire sale prices to Western investors in the Wall Street, London class. And because they were on the ground and doing these auctions through the USAID money, they held closed auctions where the only two outside investors who were allowed to actually purchase these newly privatized assets of the Soviet Union were the Harvard Institute for International Development, the Harvard Endowment, and George Soros' quantum fund. So they helped topple the Soviet Union. You can say that was a very good thing. The fact is they did. They got money from USAID to rip the country apart and sell off all its assets to foreigners.
Right.
And in exchange for that, they got to make bank because they had private exclusive access to all of those to all of those assets. And you see the same thing everywhere.
Right.
In Ukraine, George Soros is massively active in Ukraine. And what are they doing? They're selling off every aspect of Ukraine. It's oil, it's gas, it's minerals, it's agriculture to these Wall Street investment firms and to these large banks and multinational corporations. And so they're on both sides of it. And Soros does that same thing with the State Department, does the same thing with NATO, does the same thing with the IMF and the World Bank. And it's basically the ultimate insider trading card because you know exactly what to invest in. And you know it's going to be a safe bet because it's backed by the full force and credit of the U.S. military, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the State Department, as long as the wrong person doesn't get elected.
Right.
And they ran into Trump getting elected.